fundamental pivoting in order to address, what's important, what's new to consumers. I think what's really interesting, I have an economics background, much like Andrew Jenkins. And this year has been interesting for those of us who've studied economics because, we're really, consumers are digging below their Maslow, like bottom layer, Maslow hierarchy of needs. And if a brand is spending millions on a Super Bowl ad, or, when schools have no rapid testing, I think that consumers can tell if something is completely tone deaf. And so some of the things that Suri was talking about really helps us, cater to those new attitudes and behaviors.
That's such a great comment, Lori. And then over to you, Andrew, on the whole notion of the changes that you've seen. I think Lori hit on a key spot right now: brands being tone deaf. What would your perspective be on that overall?
Well, I'll pick up on the comment about tone deaf. I mean, with all the people that are now housebound, marketers have a captive audience, but they can't take that captive audience for granted. There was a period of time when people were mocking, email newsletters from brands saying, we're all in this together. We have your back. And it's like, just because I bought a sweater from you or a toaster doesn't mean we're all in this together. That doesn't mean, that transaction doesn't mean that we have a loving and kind and generous relationship. I bought something from you. And so, brands were being mocked because that was, tone deaf, and people were taking the relationship for granted. But because there is that captive audience, many marketers have doubled down on digital, but they have to do it with sensitivity and respect. And if you're going to go so far as to say we're all in this together, then it's not about a transaction. It's actually being literally helpful with your content and helpful with your marketing. And you have to reframe that approach. How can I be helpful first and earn the right to market to them later? And it's been challenging for some brands, and humanity in marketing has never been needed more, I would have to say.
Yeah, it's such an interesting point. And so, Andrew, I'm going to stay with you on this one. So, notwithstanding what you were just talking about, so if you think how brands are leveraging social media, and maybe you can point to a few brands that have started to leverage social media differently, given the notion that Suri and Lori both talked about transparency, genuinely. People are looking for social media and looking to connect to brands differently. What are some examples, maybe of a brand or two that you can think of that have really leveraged the current ecosystem environment with COVID-19, and how are they using social media differently?
Well, not to steal Lori's thunder, and she can expand on this, but Conquer Cancer, came out of nowhere. Sorry, not Conquer Cancer, Conquer COVID. Sorry, too much alliteration. But coming out of nowhere, leveraging the momentum of influencers like Hayley Wickenheiser and Ryan Reynolds, using on the ground offline support, and marrying that with a social footprint and a groundswell of support. And I don't know, Laura, you can expand on this. I don't know how much paid was behind it in terms of getting the word of mouth. Zero. So like that's a great local example and momentum. And again, that there was some humanity behind it. And I'll let Lori expand on the origins and so on. But that's one that comes to mind. And I'm not just saying that because Lori's here. But that's a great example. You're seeing more and more, even like just individuals on the likes of TikTok doing something kind and generous in their community, and they're going viral as a result. And so brands can learn from that. It's about being genuine, and your agenda as a brand can be secondary. You can earn the right to market after being genuine in your efforts. Show how you're indirect, you're funneling funds for PPE. We were just talking before that we got on here about if I want to call Bernie Sanders a brand, how he took a meme about him from Inauguration Day and turned it into a charitable endeavor. So being opportunistic, and I don't mean he wasn't being opportunistic to promote the Bernie brand. He was being opportunistic to ride the wave of interest in him to benefit somebody else. And so, I would use those examples. There are any given day now, they talk about someone will be famous on Twitter today for whatever reason. You want to be famous for the right reason. And so yesterday it was the lawyer who had the cat filter. So if you can ride that wave and turn it into something positive, then, I put that kind of as a challenge to brands there. You don't want to be, you may want to be famous. You don't want to be infamous, but I'm going to pause down. Maybe Lori can pick up on the Conquer COVID story.
Oh man, 2020 has been so hard for brands. Like so many brands got it wrong in wave one. I think that, the brands that were tone deaf started using language like the new normal as if we were all hitting a speed bump instead of a global meltdown. That was like the first thing I observed. But when it comes time to knowing how to participate, brands are a lot like humans. A lot of people want to help communities, want to help vulnerable people. They have no clue how to. And as Surrey knows, it takes time to warm up your community. You can't just jump in there and be their buddy, like Andrew said. You actually have to have earned that right over time. And I think the brands that were behind were the ones that weren't nurturing those channels when suddenly, as Andrew says, we have a captive audience. Conquer COVID was, it was just, a small effort that blew up, really. For those that on the call that aren't familiar with Conquer COVID, we just started collecting PPE because back in March, there was no PPE for hospitals, for, homeless shelters, for youth shelters, everywhere, migrant workers, you name it, First Nations. No one had PPE. So we started gathering it, and you can find PPE in, nail salons, tattoo parlors, like very unconventional places. The neat thing was the participation of our brand partners. And I think everyone approached, the pandemic problem as a human. I was grateful to have a meeting with Purolator. 10 executives showed up within 24 hours of Haley introducing me to them. And they didn't know what their company could do, but they were all there to say, we will do whatever it takes to help you. We don't know what that looks like yet, but we'll figure it out. And that's the kind of partnership, I think, that when you're in a pandemic, brands need to sort of think about, okay, well, what do humans need? And how well can we participate in this? It's not easy.
Yeah, that's awesome, Lori. And I want to got a question for Surrey on something that you had said. So, this notion that a marketer needs to warm up their community. They can't they just can't pivot overnight. Surrey, what would, if you're advising young, experienced marketers, how do you warm up a community? Like, how do you earn the right to be able to have authentic transparency and sort of change your brand narrative and your ethos around how you communicate with them?
I think for every brand, it's quite different. I think it really depends on like the maturity of the brand and like how much they've been vocal in the past, what category that they're in is very important. So I think where it gets polarizing is if you have, for instance, like you have a food brand that is all of a sudden just, talking about the pandemic in a way that doesn't directly relate to anything that they're about. Sometimes it can be polarizing where people are like, oh, like this just kind of happened overnight. But at the same time, where it comes from a genuine place where it starts with the community and they understand like who their audience is and like what they're receptive to, and really kind of think about that. A really great example I can share is, we had a client in the food CPG industry, and one of the things that we found was, their roots are from Kansas. We looked at social listening, and we actually identified that there's a lot of like food insecurity happening there. How can the brand help and really kind of, ladder back up a little bit so that we know that that's there. We know that this is part of our brand. Like, how can we give back and help and support them? So like connecting it a little bit back to what we're about, and even a little bit of our heritage was really helpful. But I think beyond that, it's really just about listening to what the conversations are and what people are asking and talking about, to be able to give back in a way that's super meaningful. So I don't think it's a, one size fits all kind of strategy. I think it really is, you really do have to start from listening to your core audience and understanding the space that you're in, and how you're pivoting and really starting to communicate with them.
Yeah, for sure. So, sir, I'm going to
Lauren,
stick with you. Go ahead, Andrew.
I was just gonna, if I can add to that, that listening and the one, like Lori said, you can't jump in and immediately be someone's buddy, but if you listen first and observe the behavior of the community and find that point of that entree. If we look at TikTok and Ocean Spray and was it Dogface? I'm forgetting his number, but Ocean Spray was listening and paid attention,
Mhm.
and they found an appropriate way to latch on to this trend and show gratitude, which is another perhaps value or
Great example.
mindset that brands could use, especially in this time, because there are non-celebrity people that are showing their brand affinities, and if brands can show their gratitude for those expressions, that's a point of entry. And I heard an interview with Mick Fleetwood, because for those of you who recall the meme of him skateboarding to Dreams by Fleetwood Mac, he brought a 40-year-old song back to the top 100.
It's
And
amazing.
Mick Fleetwood had a conference call with him and said, man, do I owe you. And so not just a Ocean Spray brand, but even Fleetwood Mac showing gratitude to someone who has come from obscurity into memedom. And if again, just showing gratitude could be a point of entry for brands too.
Yeah, Andrew, that's such a great example. And so I'm going to pivot on the continuum to the other side of amplification for social media. And I have to ask the three of you about your perspective on fake news. So everybody knows the impact of fake news. It was exasperated through the US election. It's been exasperated through COVID-19 in terms of vaccine supply, wearing masks, not wearing masks, what's the right thing to do, the wrong thing to do. And so I guess my question, starting with you, Suri, would be, when you think about something like that being expedited, given the current landscape, what does it really mean to brands, marketers, consumers? Like, how do you manage that? Or is it manageable? Like, what would be your perspective on fake news as it relates to social media?
That's a really good question. I think the whole fake news thing, I don't know if you guys have seen The Social Dilemma on Netflix as well. It's really interesting because, being a social media, like working in social media all these years, even, I talk about algorithms and how things are set up in the back, and how paid media works all the time. And to actually see kind of, head on, the people that have even created these algorithms or created email blasts, or Google, the people that created the communications that we are that we live and breathe every day are the ones that are saying, like, hold on a second, there needs to be some moderation, like in things happening, like this needs to be moderated in a way, because it's turned into a bit of a monster of algorithms favoring news that's over satiated by everybody, and then all of a sudden you see the rise of all of this fake news happening, and trends happening. So I think there's a real conversation that continues to happen, but needs to continue to happen even more around like trust. And I think the role for brands is we have to be so careful that we're not being superficial in any way. We're not putting out news. We're not just saying things for the sake of saying things. We're not latching onto the wrong trends. But again, I think it really ladders back up to this idea of trust. Trust is so important for your brand. And there isn't really much, I'm not saying that we can't really do anything to change things, but I think we can do a lot to build that trust, but also have, like, brands are starting to take a bit more of a stance, and the role that they can have to make sure that they are putting out content that is trustworthy, is genuine, all of those things. I think that's the role that brands can play today, and just to make sure that there's a lot of stuff happening in paid media where you work with, you have programmatic ads where some of the content that you have is being placed into faulty news placements, and you're like, I don't, and then you take a screenshot of it one day, you're like, oh, I saw one of my brands on this news site, I don't want it to be there. So you have to be really careful about even like the paid media choices and the media strategies. I think that is becoming a lot more eye-opening today, and you know, it has certainly in the past, but even more so with kind of the rise of everything that's been going on.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I know the RMA, from our perspective as well, in terms of paid media and the role of bots and fake news, that's an area that we're obviously passionately interested in, and more to come on that in the future. But I'll pivot it over to you, Andrew. What's your perspective as well?
Well, I mean, whether you're for him or against him, the removal of Trump from Twitter saw a 70% plus drop in misinformation volume on that platform. So that speaks volumes about fake news. When you had the likes of Parler get shut down by AWS and others because they were felt to be a perpetuator of hate and also fake news, they tried to take a different tack with their own self-appointed jury of moderators, which if you listen to the Kara Swisher interview with their CEO, it really, there needs to be a more serious stance about moderation. Suri mentions The Social Dilemma. I would also recommend that people take a look at the new documentary on HBO and Crave called Fake Famous, where they basically fabricate 3 influencers, and it's scary. And brands need to, when Suri talks about building trust, it's very easy to get caught up in this idea of the optics of, oh, we want followers, we want influence, but there's a lot of misdirection and fakery in there too, and not necessarily, I'm not saying a brand is buying followers, but I'm suggesting that they mustn't focus on some of these vanity metrics for fear of falling into the trap of fakery. Because if you watch this documentary, a guy gets out his Visa card and buys 10,000 followers for $100 and some. So we'll get asked by a client, because one of the metrics of their desired metrics is followers.
Yeah.
And I'll say, well, we're going to build this organically, or we can do paid to put your account in front of people, the right people, or I can take your Visa card and I can buy 10,000 followers by tomorrow. I'll get your goal by tomorrow, but from an optics point of view, but the quality is thrown out the window. And the analytics are a complete waste of time because now it's diluted with bots. Yeah. So it's the kind of be careful what you wish for. And so you want to make sure that everything you're doing is with genuine intent to build and foster trust and transparency with your brand. And Suri talked about the stance. Some of the choices brands are making now put them at risk of politicization or polarization. If they're taking a particular position, because of it's values based, and kudos to them that are willing to take a stand and not detract from it. But there's risks, and not every organization or brand is prepared to take some of those risks for fear of losing some of their user base.
Yeah, totally. And there's that word trust popping up again. And I think your notion, Andrew, of being careful about not chasing the wrong metrics. And so, Lori, love your perspective on this.
Yeah, what I love lately, which I've seen more in the last 12 months, is data play a front seat to telling the story, right? So we've got a number of doctors who are offering their own real data on COVID, but we're seeing sort of modeling data and charts come prime time. And I know what Andrew's talking about because I've seen very good efforts, get totally sideways by, just one influencer who does buy followers. And then, you kind of get this infection or virus into your own accounts. It is surprising how many brands still value those vanity metrics today. There's a lot that still do. And it is tough to really reset on metrics that are more meaningful. So
yeah, and so just for the panel, so anybody can pick this one up. So how do you do that? Like if you think of marketers, and I know I've been in that situation, right, where the CEO and the chief operating officer, you're selling through to the senior management group, and you're going to launch a new platform, you're going to support a new platform, you're looking for new resources for a platform, and there, how many followers, how many likes do you have, how many tweets are you going to do per week? How do you get them focused on what really matters? Like, what are the metrics that marketers should really be focused on with respect to platforms?
Yeah. Sorry. Oh, I'm echoing all of a sudden. I think it's a bits and bytes situation. It depends on the client, the industry, and what they're selling. But one of the things that we do is we sort of sit down and we go through a process of understanding what are the metrics, the KPIs that they value, what are the ones that we value. We build a dashboard together, and then we have goalposts on what optimization and benchmarking looks like. A lot of folks say they may want 10% lift on historicals, but they may be not performing very well in the past. What we like to do is say, what is the threshold to double down on paid on content that is working? And that might be plus 25%. What is the threshold that says this content isn't working? Now that's just optimization. But for those that aren't sure what their audience channels or, creative should be, there's a whole other level of testing that helps you get to the right KPIs. I guess it's hard to say in a panel. It's a pretty complex business of getting to the right metrics. But it can be done. It just takes a little collaboration.
Yeah, that's a good answer.
Yeah. I would totally agree. I think it's one of those things where you really have to look at the maturity of the brand too, like where they are in the cycle of like their life. Like it might be totally different when you're looking at a brand that is brand new to the market and has never been known before. Those KPIs might be very different because we might say like, listen, we really need to figure out a way for people to be able to discover you. And like, there's a lot of heavy lifting from an awareness perspective. And things like that, where we can start to shift and really kind of like look at what makes the most sense. Often there are companies that are challenged with budgets, right? And they don't have as much paid media budget to be able to boost or put paid behind content. So then we might say, okay, well, maybe we can look at how do we maximize organic, and what are some of the strategies? And it's not a one size fits all. There's so many different ways that you can maximize your organic strategy because there's so many factors like, where is the audience? How can we drive, I hate the word virality, but it's kind of like, how do we like hijack these moments or these trends that are happening so that you become seen? And, we might be able to pivot strategies that way too. And then I think when you get to more kind of sophisticated and brands that have like legacy brands that have been around for a long time, I think sometimes you do fall into the trap of these vanity metrics. And as you know, like social has shifted so much, like even over the pandemic, I think, what people are receptive to and what brands can sell like directly to consumers has shifted vastly. Whereas, maybe even a year ago, we would have said, people aren't as easily ready to convert not as easily to convert and respond right away. Whereas now I would actually say like, oh, I think that's completely changed now. And we can actually optimize to these metrics as well, like depending on the category and the brand, obviously. So yeah, I think it is really complex to what Lori said, but I think you can look at a number of different factors, and really it is a two-way conversation with them and as well as the teams that we work with internally to say like, we really think that these should be the priorities and these are the metrics that will lead to success for our social strategy, but also to ladder back up to the business goals.
Yeah, I love that. The age of the brand, the vertical, looking at diagnostics on what content has worked in the past. No, all great stuff. So I wanted to, go ahead, Andrew.
I was just going to add, I want to caveat or qualify when I say, we have to be careful about, followers or the vanity metrics. Don't get me wrong, there's still value in an audience or a community because that's about reach, but it's about quality. Getting Kim Kardashian to share, something on their social versus someone who's a micro influencer or just anybody who has a loyal and tight community where they actually hang on everything that person says, where many people that follow the Kardashians are there out of interest for a variety of reasons, not necessarily genuine. But the other thing, just very quickly, I'll use Suri's word ladder when it comes to metrics that we need to be paying attention to. For brands to bucket them into 3 levels, or the 3 C's of social media ROI. The first C is community, and that's the audience, that's the followers. The second C is content, related to engagement, the quality of the content. And the third C is conversion. Are they, based on what you're doing in organic or paid, does it drive a call to action that people respond to? We're not tweeting for tweet's sake. We're doing stuff in social to get people to do something on that, under the guidance of the brand. It's either make a transaction, show their affinity, sign up for a newsletter, whatever it might be. And they all kind of ladder up to one another. And it's not one C over any of the others or in isolation. It's a multi-pronged approach, or as Suri said, it's complicated.
Yeah.
Another C.
Another C, I like it. So I'm going to pivot a little bit. We talking about vanity, because I know we've talked about vanity a little bit here as well. So I have to ask the question, the elephant in the room around TikTok. The elephant in the room for me anyway. So let's talk about TikTok. Is it real? Is it a data grab, as some of us have read? Is it fake news where we read that China is using TikTok as a platform to get additional data on all of us? What say you in terms of, is TikTok real, and what's the role TikTok playing, and what does it mean to marketers as you start to negotiate that channel? And Andrew, maybe I'll start with you on this one.
Well, first of all, I love TikTok. And it's very easy to spend. And I will say, I have not posted a TikTok. I'm there strictly as an observer, but I'm fascinated by it. Their algorithm for the For You page, which is the landing page for those of you who've not used it yet, that serves up content based on how you react to it, is absolutely brilliant. As to whether or not my data is traveling back to China or not, I can't say with certainty. Now, this is going to sound very jaded, but when everyone was up in arms about Facebook, and I would be giving a presentation to a room full of people, I'd say, how many of you have deleted your Facebook account? And there would be nobody raising their arm. And so you kind of go, for whatever reason, people are willing to have that trade-off between content and experience tailored to me in exchange for the data that I provide the platform. And Laurie and I have a mutual friend who likes to say, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. And so this is the stage that we're at, and TikTok is doing probably the best job of all the social media platforms out there right now of tailoring my experience based on how I interact with it. And also, brands aren't that dominant there. Individuals who've built up a loyal audience. There's a woman from Vancouver called Call Me Chris, who in less than a year has garnered 15 million followers by doing funny and engaging content in her basement. And so it speaks to production value of content. It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be, Star Wars quality production. It just has to be funny and engaging, or elicit an emotional response. But that's my take on TikTok so far.
And what would you say, just before we go over to Suri next, on the engagement side, Andrew? I know from time to time you'll talk about the different engagement metrics associated with different platforms. Are you seeing TikTok is becoming one of the leaders on the engagement side, or are they still building their profile? Or
well, I was saying before we started the webinar, so we've been given one of our analytics platform. We've been given beta access to TikTok data. And my initial exposure, we're talking in the last 24 hours, taking a look at, we've got some celebrities in our landscape. We're looking at, Justin Bieber and Will Smith and Kylie Jenner, just out of curiosity, what kind of metrics do they get? And I've also, there's someone, his name is Humphrey, and his TikTok handle is Humphrey Talks. And some people may have seen his video spill out into other platforms where he took a pile of rice to represent $1 million, and he put a much larger pile of rice to represent $1 billion. and he does TikToks about investment, financial planning, and personal finance. And just these little sort of, storytelling, metaphors, anecdotes about financial planning. And now he has 1.5 million followers, and he's getting hired by banks to talk about their app and things like that. He's not a celebrity, he's not a household name. And like all of them, frankly, their engagement is just insane. We're looking at BlogTO for those of you that are local
Oh, yeah.
to Toronto, and looking at how TikTok now, audience wise, TikTok is not as big as Facebook or any of those just yet, but it was the most downloaded app of 2020, and so they're coming. But a lot of organizations are establishing a beachhead there, and the engagement, Instagram was the one where all the engagement was happening way ahead of LinkedIn, Facebook, or Twitter, but it wasn't a great refer of traffic outside the platform to websites and things like that. Very self-contained, sticky community. TikTok has got that same sort of thing, but on steroids, where you might get 10-15% engagement on Instagram. I saw someone with 12 million followers getting 5 million views of their video, 50% engagement, just like mind-blowing stats. So
Suri,
that's what I take so far.
thanks, Andrew. So Suri, should brands and marketers be looking at TikTok as a real platform as part of their social strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. I also love TikTok. I think we've learned so much from TikTok over the past year. I think there are different ways that brands can execute on TikTok, and a lot of different strategies that I've seen over the past, even 6 months. And I would say it is a very kind of less branded experience, and a lot of individuals that are kind of rising to the top. So one way that brands are working with TikTok on TikTok is by collaborating with the TikTok kind of creators. I think even TikTok itself has actually started to build a model where they've built a platform for brands to be able to easily engage TikTok creators on their own, and like collaborate with them to build content. So I would say that's one of the main ways that I've seen a lot of brands activate. And also, I've also seen a lot of brands look at TikTok for all the early markers of trends happening. So when you start to see there's a really, really interesting editing format or construct that is starting to rise to the top because of, to Andrew's point, it's lo-fi, but they've built all these functionalities on the app where you can edit and create all these stickers and things in the app that become like native to the experience of how people view video all of a sudden. And it's because it's built all the functionality so that it continues to re-engage the brain over and over again. So brands can look at TikTok to get inspiration on even like creative and editing styles, all the way to the types of content that's starting to trend, and seeing like early markers of discovering a trend that's about to happen, collaborating with influencers. And I would also say there are brands that are actually like created their own brand accounts and have been doing it really, really well. A lot of them have built that cult fandom already. And so when you've got that cult fandom already, it's very easy to be a brand that people notice and care about, and people really look to you almost as the brand that's creating the trends almost. So I think depending on the type of brand that you are, but again, you're seeing categories, vast categories. Like I follow accounts where there's a 20-year-old that gives me like advice on stocks, and the types of content. It's a snippet of content, it's 30 seconds, and I'm like listening to what he's saying, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I just bought this stock and I just made like $5,000 like in a day. So like it's kind of crazy, just the vastness. I've seen a police officer that has content in the GTA, and his content is hilarious. And of course, that makes the connection to cops being these nice people and having fun and having that more of that humanized connection a little bit more real. So I think, TikTok is a place where people are finding ways to connect with communities, have a perspective, and it is so deeply like emotionally ingrained because it's it's a place where people want to get entertained and they want to kind of have fun, and there's a lot of creative ways to do that, and learn from a brand perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Suri. And Lori, over to you. Are you a TikToker? And what do you think of the notion of, is this behind the scenes a data grab potentially?
I love TikTok, and I'm a Gen X. Like some folks complain Gen X is like bombarding TikTok. I haven't been this excited about a social platform since Twitter. I mean, Instagram, yeah, Snapchat, meh. TikTok is game changing. I mean, we've all turned to the internet for commerce, love, and networking, but now we're turning the internet for health and politics and elections. Unfortunately, disinformation with elections. The stakes are really high, and it is amazing how many people are using TikToks for Black Lives Matter or sharing, indigenous culture, or even just where people go for health information en masse. I mean,
Amazing.
how did I get COVID is actually one of the prominent themes on TikTok. With respect to data, I've been looking at our chat for this webinar, and Brandon brings up some good points. Is this a data grab? Well, we're talking like TikTok's the only one doing it. Like, I mean, there's a lot of data out there on people. And I mean, my business is understanding what people say and do. And anything that's in text format, there are tons of tools that help you understand what matters and what people are sharing and what people are saying. Anything that is, voiced out can also be translated to text. I mean, there's a facility in TikTok to do that, but voice to text today is like 98% accurate. It's very, very powerful. So, there is a lot we can do with data today. All the platforms are sharing it. There are some platforms that don't offer data, APIs, but by and large, data is something you've got to watch out for in any platform, not just TikTok.
You should be asking Parler and tracking the people that went to the Capitol, or
Yeah.
every time you're at cashing out at a store, and they say, "Do you have a loyalty card of some kind to scan?" Or
crowdsourcing
that,
justice.
Yeah, that data has been being collected for ages, long before social.
Well, there's also this neat, discipline called open source intelligence, OSINT, OSINT, and it is I hesitate to say vigilantes. It's people that can really dig into the data and find out what your activity is, to the tune of like identifying people at the Capitol. But there's a lot of people are doing that. Deloitte, consulting companies.
Just to add to what Laura was saying about Black Lives Matter as an example, one of the interesting things about TikTok, and I welcome Lori and Suri's comment about, I'll call it a teaching moment, meaning like Suri gave the example of the local police officer. There's a woman I follow on TikTok, I think her handle's like Taco Queen, or Taco Bell Queen, and she basically does TikToks with her brother who's autistic, who loves Taco Bell, loves a particular basketball team, I think it's Chicago, and one other football team. And she uses the platform to educate people about having an autistic brother. And she's not exploiting him, and people will pile into the comments and say, like, "You're exploiting." She said, "No, I ask him if he wants to, and he only does it if he wants to." And so there's a number of people that are using the platform to educate and give people insider knowledge, people with Tourette's, people that are coming out of abusive situations, and they're using the platform to educate. And to me, it's unlike the platforms that have come before it in the way it's being used. So I just wanted to flag that.
All right, no, great dialogue. I'm going to pause for a moment. I'm going to ask Derek. We've got a couple questions in chat that I think would be great for the panelists. Derek, do you just want to share?
Sure. Anonymous attendee says that from a From a content and transparency perspective, prior to the pandemic, there seems to be a surge in sustainable products and sustainable companies. Do you feel the pandemic has accelerated this, or do you feel the retailers and business are more focused on surviving than promoting this aspect of product and services?
What do you think, Suri?
I certainly have seen the same thing. I think a lot of brands, it was a shift that's been happening in terms of sustainability and really, really acknowledging kind of the concerns and the values of consumers today. But I do think that over the pandemic, like I said, with so many other things, it really has expedited like caring about those things even more, because these are the things that consumers have voice that they care about, and brands looking to what consumers values are a little bit more. So I have seen that those efforts have started to rise up quite quickly. I always, I think the thing that really makes me feel really happy, and I have a lot of gratitude for the industry that I'm working in now, is the shift of like the genuine stances that brands are starting to take, right? Like, it's not just advertising anymore. It's not just like we're just doing this because everybody is telling us that we have to do it. I think people, like, when brands are actually making these conscious decisions, it is becoming more meaningful and deeper rooted into their efforts, because they have to. That's what consumers demand, and that's what they expect from brands. So I hope that it is a little bit more deeply rooted than it being something that is self-serving or something that they're just talking about because it's topical. But I have seen a shift where there's more attention to it. For sure.
Yeah, I would add, before I head it over to Lori, what do you think of Gen Ys and Gen Zs, right? They're actually very plugged into the material aspect, but the real genuinity of brands. And Lori, what would be your comment on that?
We studied some Gen Zs and their, what's important to them. What's interesting in the past is that when there was a sort of a movement per se, usually was led by one leader. And what we're seeing today with TikTok, with Twitter, is that the movement, it's not that it's leaderless, it's that it's led by a group or a community, right? And so, a perfect example is Trump's rallies and the K-pop fans that bought empty seats or created empty seats at his rally. So I find that advocacy and movements and climate change and sustainability, like, it is operating at a different level, kind of like how a subreddit can buy, into a stock, right? So I don't know. I kind of lost my train of thought there, but I just know that younger generations operate a little bit differently, and they're just sort of a bit more mobilized in how they approach the things that they care about.
Yeah, absolutely. Andrew, anything to add?
I just think, the pandemic, for all of us, no matter the age demographic, we've had, whether you call it the luxury or the burden of time, to reflect on what we value. And, we can't travel. We can't go out and do stuff. And so are we at home being reminded of how much stuff we have that we don't use and don't need? Like all these sorts of things that are kind of like we're reflecting on, and those values are spilling out now into the brands that we want to align with, the transactions we want to make. If we want to buy a stock, it's not because there's an expression I've heard recently, is it green or greed? Do I want to profit from my investment, or am I making an investment because it aligns with my values? And so this is, I think, even more top of mind, and especially for some of the millennial generation. In the long run, yes. Do I want to retire with a nice nest egg? Sure. But I'm going to do it perhaps more values-based than profit-based.
Yeah, for sure.
There's another question here. Thanks, Andrew. That was great. I want to see Lawrence Solway do one of his famous dances on TikTok. Perhaps the dance moves that melted his wife's heart when he was wooing her. What do you think, Lawrence?
I'm happy to do that as long as I get a royalty.
We'll share it on the RMA's social.
Totally.
Uh,
I did have another comment came in, which as it relates to technology, this is an interesting question. And so when you think about the rapid acceleration of technology, so whether it's augmented reality, virtual reality, blockchain, all the ones that we hear buzzwords around recently, what impact do you think they've had on social media, especially over the last COVID period, if you will? And do you think there'll be any rapid advances or changes, maybe more social commerce? What do you think the impact of technology will be moving forward on social media? Maybe Laurie, starting with you.
Sure. In my own world, so I use I conduct social listening and I use AI platforms. And what's happened in the last 2-3 years is a merging of tech platforms. You either have AI platforms that are really good at analyzing real-time conversation, or you have platforms that have large historical data sets. And what you've seen in the last 2 years is a lot of merging of companies. So those two tech stacks have been brought together. So you've kind of got the best of both worlds. PR, lobbyists, et cetera, use real time, tend to sort of use that, or pharmaceutical companies, and consumer product brands tend to use historical. So now you've got so much more power in the AI tools that you're using, and it's allowing you to sort of really cut and analyze data in meaningful ways. I think that what we're seeing is more machines with humans, right? Like, these machines are expensive. They cost as much as, several FT, full-time staff. So you've got to really, for brands and companies, we got to think about, well, how do we balance the machines and the humans together? How does that impact the social media landscape? Well, in our business, I always talk about how data can show you a shorter path to growth.
Mhm.
And some of the companies that I've been working with are like private equity investors or investor owners, those that have really aggressive goals. And when you use data, you can find shortcuts because you can find things that people value. And that's especially important in a pandemic. So that's how I'm finding technology changing the way we work.
Andrew, what do you think?
Well, in the case of AI, I've seen a dramatic impact on social and content. There are tools where I can upload a blog and it will be read using an AI solution and become a podcast. Another AI solution will take that same blog and parse it into 20 social posts. I can upload a video and it'll cut it into clips, nice 10, 15-second sound bites with captions with one click of a button. And there's a new AI tool out called Copysmith. I give it 3 keywords and 1 paragraph to give it a sense of tone and direction, and click a button, and there's a 500-word blog.
I think Elon Musk is working on something like that, eh?
Right. Well, and I don't say that to scare marketers or content creators. To some degree, it's making us more efficient, more productive, and so we can decide where and when we might want to use the AI. It still comes down to, I don't think AI can define strategy. So there can be some elements of the execution that we might defer to AI, but if Laurie disagrees.
No, what I was thinking is a build on what you're saying. Can I just say that, systems of oppression find their ways in AI in a way that penalizes diversity, things like voice activation, early days trained on males, they probably, Caucasian males, algorithms like Google search, penalized, certain community groups. I think there's a lot of watch outs for us today in AI development.
And just more on the VR side of that. So many won't remember a social media or a social platform called Second Life.
Oh yeah, Avatar.
The virtual world, and the difference. So here in the social world of today, I am myself. You know my handle, you know my image. I'm not anonymous. On Reddit, I can be anonymous. On the likes in a virtual world like Second Life, if I wanted to be a 3-foot dragon with horns with a different, sort of mystical name, to be that character or avatar in that environment, I could be. And so there was an element playing against my being trustworthy because I was anonymous. I wasn't even in human form. So when you talk about VR and some of these I'll call these new realms, I don't think we should be, you know, venturing too quickly into them without thinking about trust, and trying to avoid anonymity.
For sure. And Suri, do you find with your client base, like when you're advising them, are they pushing for embracing new technologies, or how are you managing the dialogue with them?
Yeah, I think, just to kind of take a different angle from what everyone was talking about, because I do think technology is really helping to advance and like identify the insights really quickly. I do agree that there has to be a balance where, it can't come up with the strategies, and there's a human layer to it. But one thing I do think that maybe is working out in favor of brands and marketers is the level of like customization you can do. So being able to customize like auto responses, or customize my website to have specific inputs and outputs as a direct response to what people are feeding into it. I think people are really embracing that, and I think it's becoming almost like second nature to what people are expecting from brands today too. So like now I can go on this website and put like what my experiences have been in terms of my skincare or my hair routine, and the texture and all of these things that I input, and then it'll actually shoot me out an actual product composition that's made specifically for me, that's like labeled for me, and they will send me a bottle that is like hair care for me, right? So there's some really interesting innovations that I think are popping up that a lot of venture studio brands and direct to consumer brands are really, really embracing at a much faster rate than I think some of the legacy brands that we work with. But it's really interesting because I think it can go on both sides, where there's tremendous watch outs, like people being able to use AI to like basically recreate people's faces. And I think I just read this article about how you can spot them, like there's like little imperfections that you can barely tell, like from the naked eye, but when you start to look at some of the differences, you're able to tell that it's like a fake profile picture. So like there are scary things like that, but on the other side of things, I think it really has helped with expediting to get answers, and be able to build strategies, and also the customization layer in terms of consumer expectations and user behaviors.
Yeah, such an interesting area. I actually wish we had another hour because I'd like to go deep on all the technology implications. But I had a question, last question I have, which is a tangent question to the impact of technology and how marketers are embracing it. Is there any concerns that marketers need to worry about as it relates to data and GDPR through integration with social platforms? Because they seem to be becoming a little bit more invasive, or brands are using them more elegantly or intimate than they were in the past. Is that a concern? Maybe over to you, Lori.
I mean, yeah, I mean, it's all, it is a concern because, I mean, we have the power to go down to the individual, as we saw with the storming of the Capitol. People do have the power to look at people individually. And I think the only thing that holds us back, it's not technology anymore. It's really about ethics.
Yeah, a bit of a slippery slope. Suri, what do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. And I'm also seeing that like with platforms, they're changing quite a lot in terms of what gets flagged, in terms of what brands can and can't say. And I'm using, Facebook and Instagram as a very specific example, where they're trying and they're making efforts, but it's so arbitrary. Like as a marketer, I'm like, I'm not really sure why this got flagged, or what I'm saying wrong, or how this, what their criteria is. So I think there's a lot of arbitrary things that are happening where it's almost like seemingly they're trying to do something about it, but like it's not defined. Like we don't really know. So I think that aspect of things, there's a lot to build on, and certainly room for improvement. But yeah, to Lori's point, I think it is a slippery slope, because then, does it become subjective, and like it's so arbitrary. I don't really know how we're making these rules and what the criteria is. So I think it can be better defined and just more clear for people so that we know what the expectations are.
Yeah, for sure. And Andrew, I know we've talked about this a lot at the RMA in terms of the role of privacy and data and GDPR. What would be your perspective?
Well, I think it's as a brand or an organization, it's not my data, it's my customers' data or my users' data. And so there's an element of responsibility and accountability for that, to disclose where and how it's being used, where and how it's being captured and stored potentially, to be transparent. And something as simple as perhaps taking a stance and not use Facebook to log in unless you're disclosing how much of the data you're sharing with Facebook. Because a lot of people don't realize some relationships with Facebook, it's a little bit of data, and others, it's this much. And something as simple as that. But again, you have to be forthcoming. And I think that'll go a long way to foster trust.
Yeah, totally. All right, well, I think we're out of time. And so to Andrew, Laurie, and Suri, I just want to say thank you for being an amazing panel, and thanks for being so conversant. As I said, I wish we had more time. Unfortunately, I won't be able to dance either, as per TikTok, so we run
Today.
I also want to give a special thanks to the RMA for setting this up, and then to all the folks that were listening in. Stay tuned for the next series on our Think and Disrupt webinar series. Lots more to come. So just to everybody, thanks for tuning in. And again, special thank you to the panelists. And stay healthy, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.